How's it going, everybody? My name is LuckyBunz. In today's video, we're going to be going over the new rotation of Team Rocket Grunts and Leaders. Now, for those of you who don't actually know this, a few months ago, Scopely actually enabled every single Shadow Pokemon to be eligible for a Shiny, so there's no longer specific Shadow Pokemon that can be Shiny. Every single one is completely on the table now, and that is going to be at a Shiny rate of 1 out of 256, and then from the Team Leaders, that is going to be 1 out of 64. So you do actually have a higher chance of actually getting a Shadow Shiny from a Team Leader compared to a regular Rocket Grunt. Now keep in mind though, these are still some of the rarest Pokemon to acquire in the entire game because getting Shadow Pokemon, the only way to get them is through doing the Team Rocket Grunts or Leaders. You cannot trade Shadow Pokemon, so if you are able to get one of these, it's a huge flex. Now, additionally, on top of that, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Shadow Pokemon are also some of the most difficult to obtain with optimal IVs for raids and for PvP. For raid battles, you do want to get the highest IVs possible, but for PvP, it does work a little bit differently. You essentially want to have low attack IVs and high defense and high stamina. And the reason for this is because it actually allows you to level up your Pokemon the most before it hits the CP limit for the Great League or the Ultra League. Now, there are going to be some Pokemon that are exceptions because their max CP does not reach that limit, in which case you would just want to have the best IVs possible. If you want to quickly pull up good PvP IVs for Great League and for Ultra League, you can use this search string on screen, but with the fundamentals out of the way, now let's take a look at the best Rocket Grunts to focus on. So first up, let's take a look at the normal type Rocket Grunt. In the first slot, we're going to get access to Stuffle, which is actually a new Shadow Pokemon, Meowth, and Swablu. So in terms of which ones you should be paying attention to, Swablu is going to be a 1k purification, which is really nice. And then like I mentioned, Stuffle is going to be a new Shadow Pokemon, so definitely worth picking up for your Pokedex entries. Moving on, let's talk about our Fire-type Rocket Grunt next. So for the first time, the second slot Pokemon for the Fire-type Rocket Grunt are going to be available. For those of you who don't know, sometimes the Rocket Grunts do actually allow you to catch the second Pokemon, which is a pretty rare chance. I think it's like 10 to 15% chance to actually get one of those, and historically the Fire-type Rocket Grunt has never actually allowed us to get that second slot, so this is actually pretty cool. First slot, we're going to get access to Vulpix, Litwick, and Fennekin, and in the second slot, we're going to get access to Magmar, Camerupt, and Braixen. Now, in terms of meta relevance, Shadow Litwick, when evolved all the way up into Chandelure, is one of the best Fire-type attackers and best Ghost-type attackers to use in the game, and if you're actually wondering which are the best non-legendary Shadow Pokemon to power up, then I'd strongly recommend watching this video on screen. I just made this a few days ago, so it's freshly updated for 2026, and it should be very helpful. But otherwise, in terms of the other meta-relevant options that we have, Fennekin, when evolved all the way up into Delphox, with the Legacy Charge move, Blast Sprint is also really good, but again, does require that Elite Charge TM, so maybe not as good as something like Shadow Chandelure, which doesn't require any Legacy movesets. The only downside to Chandelure, I would have to say, is that it is a lot more glassy, but if used correctly, especially against other Rocket Grunts, this Pokemon is amazing with Incinerate and Flame Charge. Otherwise, in the second slot, we do have the second form of Fennekin, Braixen, which, again, if you do happen to get that, more power to you. And then we do have Magmar and Camerupt. Camerupt does have a Mega Evolution, so if you want to purify that to potentially get the Hundo, that could be pretty good right there. Overall, the Fire-type Rocket Grunt is pretty solid. Even Vulpix, when evolved all the way up into Ninetales, is pretty decent to use in the Open Great League and the Open Ultra League, so all around the Fire-type Rocket Grunt is definitely one you guys should always be doing. Next up, we have the Water-type Rocket Grunts. So we have two different versions of this. We have the male Rocket Grunt and the female Rocket Grunt. For the male-specific Rocket Grunt for the Water type, you get access to Magikarp and Feebas. So let's talk about the meta relevance right now. First of all, Magikarp is a 1k purification, so that's fantastic. And then otherwise, when evolved into Gyarados, this does get access to a Mega Evolution, not to mention it's also good in every single league format for PvP, so Great League, Ultra League, and Master League. Going back to the female Rocket Grunt, Froakie, when evolved all the way up into Grey Ninja, is actually a pretty good Water-type attacker to use with the Legacy Comday moveset Hydro Cannon. And then same thing with Krabby when evolved all the way up into Kingler, although it is pretty glassy. Kingler doesn't require any legacy movesets, and it's actually really good to use as a Water-type attacker. Those are the two best options if you don't actually have Shadow Kyogre or even regular Kyogre. So definitely two to pay attention to. Dewpider is actually a new Shadow Pokemon, which could be pretty good to use in PvP. I'm not really sure what the rankings are right now because it just came out, but maybe one of you guys can let us know. And then we have Sharpedo. It actually has some of the best DPS, but it's also like the definition of a glass cannon. So if you are able to get a good one of these, that could be fun. Not to mention the Shadow Shiny looks really good. And then we have Tentacruel, which is actually pretty good to use in the Open Ultra League. So some pretty good options here for the Water-type Rocket Grunts. Definitely one you do want to do as well, whether it's the female or the male. Following that, we have the Electric-type Rocket Grunt, and so for this one, we're going to get access to Helioptile, Voltorb, and Shinx in the first slot, and then LuckyBunz, Voltorb, and Alolan Geodude in the second slot. Now, in terms of which ones I would pay attention to, if you do get Alolan Geodude, that is a 1k purification. Otherwise, none of them are really that good, except for Shadow Electabuzz, because when evolved into Shadow Electivire, that is actually a fantastic Electric-type option to use in the Raid/Gym meta, so that's a pretty good one, but again, it is in the second slot, so slim chances of that happening. Although, I was lucky enough to actually get that as a 98% IV Shadow a really, really long time ago, and I do have that thing maxed out. So, I mean, anything's possible. It is a small chance, but it can still happen. Next up, let's take a look at the Grass-type Rocket Grunt. So in the first slot, we're going to get access to Chespin, Morlul, and Cacnea, and then for the second slot, we're going to get Phantom, Leap, and the second form of Chespin, which I'm pretty sure is Quilladin, but I'm not 100% sure. I actually don't go over the second forms that often, and we just have the pictures on LeakDuck here, so it is a little bit harder to actually know which ones they are, but essentially that's what it is. And so when it comes down to these, Chespin, when evolved all the way up into Chestnut, is actually a really, really good grass-type attacker to use for the Raid/Gym meta with the Legacy Comday moveset Frenzy Plant. Morlul doesn't have any meta relevance to my knowledge, but this is a new Shadow Pokemon during this rotation, and it is going to give you bonus Stardust when you actually catch it, so always a great reason to be doing these. And then the other Pokemon, Phantom, when evolved into Trevenant, is actually pretty good to use in the Open Ultra League, so great Pokemon right there. And the others I don't think are really worth paying attention to, like Leap and Cacnea, so wouldn't worry about those, but you do have some pretty good picks here that definitely make the Grass-type Rocket Grunt worth doing. The Ice-type Rocket Grunt is going to be up next. Now, in terms of the best ones to pay attention to here, Swinub is definitely the #1 pick, especially if you don't have access to White Kyurem. When evolved all the way up into Shadow Mamoswine, this is actually the best Ice-type attacker in the game, excluding White Kyurem and also Black Kyurem, so a fantastic Pokemon you do want to try and get your hands on. Shadow Weavile, when evolved all the way up from Shadow Sneasel, is also a really good Ice-type attacker to use, but Mamoswine is definitely much better. So yeah, great picks right there. No legacy movesets required. Definitely make sure to be doing the Ice-type Rocket Grunts if you happen to see those two. Following that, we have the Fighting-type Rocket Grunt, so we're going to get access to Timber, Machop, and Mankey in the first slot, and then Hitmontop, Hitmonlee, and Hitmonchan in the second slot. We actually have a pretty strong first slot rotation. Timber was not available in the first slot for some time. I believe last rotation it was, but it's pretty cool to see them continue to keep this in there, because when evolved into Shadow Conkeldurr, its final evolution, this is one of the best Shadow options to use as a fighting type attacker, so great to see that. It's much better than a Shadow Machamp, so if you want to prioritize anything and you happen to see a Shadow Timber, make sure to always do that. But then again, right, you can get everything Shadow Shiny now, which really does make getting any of these Pokemon pretty interesting. Mankey, when evolved all the way up into Annihilate, is also really good to use in PvP, the Great League, Ultra League, and the Master League, so it's a great Pokemon that you also want to pay attention to. And then when it comes down to the second slot, the Hitmons, none of them are really worth paying attention to, but I guess if you happen to get that Shadow Shiny, that could be pretty cool. Taking a look at our Poison-type Rocket Grunt next, we're going to get access to Oddish, Zubat, and Quillfish in the first slot, Nidorina, Nidorino, and Galarian Weezing in the second slot. So this is pretty similar to what we had during the last rotation. Nothing really meta relevant here. Quillfish is kind of good to use in the Open Great League, so I guess maybe pay attention to that one. And then Nidorina, when evolved into Nidoqueen, is also decently good to use in the Great League and the Ultra League. And then also Galarian Weezing is actually great to use in the Open Ultra League, so yeah, you have some pretty decent picks for PvP here. Nothing great for the Raid/Gym meta, but Zubat is a 1k purification, so I guess pay attention to that one. And overall, I would definitely say that doing the Poison-type Grunts, definitely something worth doing, especially because we have a chance to get them in their Shadow Shiny forms, and every single one of these does have a pretty cool Shiny variant, so yeah, definitely worth doing the Poison-type Grunts. Next up, let's talk about the Ground-type Rocket Grunt. So in the first slot, we're going to get access to Sandshrew, Trapinch, and Gligar, and then in the second slot, we're going to get access to Claydol, Vibrava, and then also Gligar once again. So the Ground-type Rocket Grunt, maybe not the best, definitely not compared to how they used to be, because we had Shadow Rhyhorn before available in this pool, and unfortunately that's not available right now, which is one of the best Pokemon to power up as Rhyperior. But yeah, the Ground-type Rocket Grunt is definitely a far cry from what it used to be. The Flying-type Rocket Grunt is up next, so from the first slot we get access to Swablu, Pidgey, and Tailo, and that's pretty much it. I think in the past we did actually have access to the second slot, but it doesn't look like like that's going to be the case during this rotation. So once again, Swablu and Pidgey, 1k purifications, great ones to do right there. And then Talo, that's a 3k purification, but yeah, I guess it has a cool shiny, so there is that. Next up, let's take a look at our Psychic type Rocket Grunt. So this one is the exact same rotation. The only slot available is going to be the first one. We're going to get access to Ralts, Drowsy, and Wobbuffet. All great potential Shadow shinies. And when it comes down to the meta relevance, Ralts is your #1 option to be hunting. If you do happen to see Ralts, definitely make sure to be doing this, because Shadow Gardevoir is one of the best fire type attackers to power up in Pokemon Go, so definitely high priority if you do happen to encounter a Shadow Ralts from this Psychic type Rocket Grunt. Next up, we have the Bug type Rocket Grunt. So in the first slot, we're going to get access to Venonat, Shelmet, and Carablast, and then in the second slot, we're going to get Pinsir, Shuckle, and Anorith. Now, it's pretty cool that Shuckle is going to have the chance at a Shadow Shiny, because that one is really, really cool. And then Pinsir also does have a Mega Evolution, so it's not the best to use as a Shadow. I mean, it's actually pretty good as a Bug type. I'm not going to say it's actually that bad. But overall, it does have the Mega Evolution, which does make it one of the best Bug type options to use in the game. Heracross is better, but still, it's pretty cool to have the chance of getting that Hundo. And overall, I would say if you do happen to get a really good IV spread on your Shadow, it could be worth using, potentially even the Shadow Shiny, but I wouldn't go crazy on this one. Bug types aren't utilized as often as some of the other types in Pokemon Go. But actually, a really sleeper pick that I just talked about recently in my best Pokemon to power up video for the Shadows non-legendary is going to be Carablast, which evolves into Escavalier. Specifically with Party Power, using this Pokemon with Megahorn is actually insanely good as a Bug type option. So personally, if you happen to encounter that one, make sure to be doing this all the way through. Of course, you'll always have that chance of getting the second slot Pokemon, but if you get a really good IV spread on a Shadow Carablast, that could definitely be worth powering up for the Raid/Gym meta, which is definitely not something that I think most people do consider as an option, just because it's not really that good outside of the Party Power bonus. So again, very specific situation there, but if you are using Party Power a lot in Pokemon Go, could definitely be worth it. Next up, let's take a look at our Rock type Rocket Grunt. So for this one, we're going to get access to Shuckle, Omanite, and Cranidos in the first slot, and that's pretty much it. No second slot available this time for the Rock type Rocket Grunt, and these are actually pretty good picks though. I would have to say that the Rock type Rocket Grunt is definitely one that you do want to be doing all the time. All three Pokemon are actually great in their shiny forms. I think they look fantastic. Shuckle is really fun. I do have the Shadow Hundo. Not that it's like used anywhere, but it's a really fun gym defender. Omanite, when evolved into Omastar, I mean, it's a cool shiny. And then Cranidos is actually one of the top meta picks when evolved into Rampardos. No legacy movesets required here. It is a glass cannon, but it's a very, very good rock type attacker to use, so really happy to see that Pokemon available in the first slot for sure. Next up, we have the Ghost type Rocket Grunt. So in the first slot, we're going to get access to Ghastly, Mask, and Duskull, and then in the second slot, we're going to get Dusclops, Sableye, and Cofagrigus. Duskull and Dusclops are both really good for PvP, especially when evolved all the way up into Dusknoir. Ghastly, when evolved all the way up into Gengar, is actually a glass cannon, but a pretty good option, especially if you don't get a good IV spread on a Shadow Litwick and then evolve it into Chandelure. Pretty good pick to use as a ghost type option right there, but I would say that Shadow Chandelure is the better pick overall, so if you feel like you're encountering these a bit more often, I mean, keep trying to get a good IV spread on that one because it is definitely better than Shadow Gengar. They're both kind of glassy, but you know, Shadow Chandelure is just the superior choice, especially because it can also function as a fire type attacker. And then Yamask, when evolved into Cofagrigus, is pretty decent to use in the Open Great League and the Open Ultra League, so you could want to use it there. And yeah, oh, and Sableye, I forgot about Sableye. Sableye is great to use in the Open Great League too, also gives you 750 Stardust per catch. So long story short, the Ghost type Rocket Grunt is definitely one you shouldn't be skipping. There's a lot of really good picks out of this one, whether you're going to be going for raids or for PvP. Following that, we have the Dragon type Rocket Grunt. So pretty good rotation right here, especially because Shadow Dino can now be Shadow Shiny. We're also going to have Dratini and Bagon available, both great picks. Shadow Salamence is a great Dragon type attacker to use, same thing with Dragonite. Hydreigon is a really good dark type attacker to use, and we do have the upcoming Dino Calm Day, which even if you're unable to get a good IV spread on one of these before that happens, you could always save it for the end of the year for December Calm Day to get the legacy moveset Brutal Swing on your Hydreigon when you evolve it. So a great Pokemon overall to pay attention to, and you have a lot of time to actually get a good IV spread and get rid of frustration on it, because we're going to have at least 2 more Team Rocket takeovers before the end of this year. And then when it comes down to Dratini, this is probably the best one to focus on out of the Dragon type Rocket Grunt, just because Dragonite does have a Mega Evolution in Pokemon Go now, and so if you do get the chance to purify that for the Hundo, definitely consider it, alright? Consider it, but only when you get a second one. And the reason I say that is because Dragonite as a shadow is just so good to use, so if you have a really good IV spread, I would recommend keeping it as a shadow, but if you happen to get a second really good IV spread that could be purified for the Hundo and you don't have that for the Mega Dragonite, then go with that option, but only if you get a second one. You could honestly say the same thing for the Bagon when evolved all the way up into Salamence too. I do have a Shadow 98, which is actually maxed out. Love using that thing. Dragon Tail destroys. Next up, we have the Dark type Rocket Grunt, so only the first slot available here, and basically we just have Alolan Rattata, Poochyena, and Carvanha. That's it. That's pretty much all that you have, and 2 of those are going to be 1k purification, so just like the Flying type Rocket Grunt, that's the main appeal to this one. Next up, for the Steel type Rocket Grunt, we're going to get access to Alolan Sandshrew, Beldum, and Aron. Aron is going to be a 1k purification. Alolan Sandshrew, when evolved all the way up into Alolan Sandslash, is actually pretty good to use in the Open Great League and the Open Ultra League. And then Beldum, when evolved all the way up into Metagross, is actually really good to use with the Legacy Comday moveset Meteor Mash if you don't have access to Zacian or Zamazenta in their crown form, or Duskmane Necrozma. And then finally, we have the Fairy type Rocket Grunt, which is going to have Snubbull, Alolan Vulpix, and Ralts in the first slot, and then Kirlia, Snubbull, and Galarian Weezing in the second slot. We talked about Ralts earlier. This is going to be the best Fairy type attacker to use as a shadow in the Raid/Gym meta, so definitely one to pay attention to. Otherwise, Snubbull you can pretty much ignore. I kind of hate running into those. And then Alolan Vulpix, when evolved into Alolan Ninetales, is decent to use in the Open Great League and the Open Ultra League, but you do want to have the Legacy Comday moveset for it. Which, it did actually have the Comday this year, so if you happen to get a good IV spread, hold on to that until the end of the year to actually evolve it to get that moveset for free during December. Now we do actually have 3 more Rocket Grunts. We have the Rare Rocket Grunt Male, the Rare Rocket Grunt Female, and the Decoy Grunt. So from the Rare Rocket Grunt Male, we're going to get access to the starter Pokemon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. These all do have some meta relevance in both PvP and raid battles. You could also purify them for the Hundo for the Mega Evolution, so definitely worth doing them. Now the female Rocket Grunt normally has Shadow Snorlax, but because Shadow Snorlax is going to be available from Cliff during this rotation, Shadow Lapras is now going to be available from the female Rocket Grunt. Previously, this was only available from raid battles. I think like a really long time ago it was available from Rocket Grunts, but I don't think the Shadow Shiny was eligible at the time, so this is super exciting. Normally I always skip these because it's like the most difficult Rocket Grunt to beat in the entire game, but if Shadow Shiny Lapras is on the table in that first slot, you better believe I'm going to be doing these every single time. Now finally, we do have the Decoy Grunt, which is going to have Shadow Bellsprout as the available Pokemon. For those of you that are kind of confused on how this works, basically the only way to encounter Decoy Grunts is with a Super Rocket Radar, which you do use for Giovanni. So basically, if you don't have access to a Super Rocket Radar or you don't feel like holding on to it, you cannot actually do these Decoy Grunts, which I will have to say is a pretty big mistake. I think getting the extra chances to do the Decoy Grunts, because they are at set stops, it'll give you more components. You get the chance at a Shadow Shiny Bellsprout, which is usable, does also have a Mega Evolution. That's definitely worth it. And not to mention, the Shadow Legendary Pokemon available from Giovanni right now is totally worth skipping, so it's worth holding on to your Super Rocket Radar because at some point in the future, we're going to get a good Shadow Legendary available from Giovanni, and then you can cash those in. I've been doing this for a long time, and previously we were getting these from the special research, but now we're going to be getting these from the Go Passes, it looks like. So you pretty much have to be playing during the event to actually get it, and if you're not playing during the event, you will not be able to get the Super Rocket Radar. So again, very important to pay attention to when these events are going to be happening more than ever now. And then basically, once you're done farming these, you can just go to your inventory and unequip your Super Rocket Radar. That way you don't have to keep encountering Giovanni, because if you do have this equipped, when you get your balloon, it is going to be Giovanni guaranteed, and this is going to be the real one. You don't really want that to be happening. So again, it is pretty fun to farm the Decoy Grunts. Not everyone really gets into it, but there is a very big appeal for the extra components and the chance at a Shadow Shiny Bellsprout, which I have gotten. So we talked about the Rocket Grunts, now let's talk about the Rocket Leaders and their available Shadow Shiny Pokemon, which once again have a chance to be a Shadow Shiny at 1 out of 64 instead of 1 out of 256. So Cliff is going to get access to Shadow Snorlax, Arlo's going to get access to Shadow Pineco, and then Sierra's going to get access to Shadow Duskull. In terms of the best ones to pay attention to here, I would say that Snorlax is probably the most fun for the chance at the Shadow Shiny, and then we have Duskull, which is super good to use in PvP, so getting that one with a good IV spread and Shadow Shiny could be pretty fun to hunt. And then we have Pineco, which, historically Arlo really hasn't had the best options here. But that one is decent to use in PvP too when evolved into Fortress. So none of them are really terrible options, but I would have to say that Sierra and Cliff are probably the best too. And then for Giovanni, we have access to Shadowverse Incarnate, which is worth skipping. It is worth saving your Super Rocket Radar for this one. So essentially it's the same concept though. You don't want to actually be using your Super Rocket Radar. Hold on to this, just use it to farm the decoy grunts if you want to, and that's pretty much about it. It should definitely be saved for a better Pokemon to cash in on. I have so many of these saved up, and you better believe if we ever get Shadow Shiny Rayquaza available from Giovanni, I'm going to be using them on that. Although that's kind of a long shot, and there are reasons why we're probably not going to get that from Giovanni, just due to power creeps and stuff like that, but that's a discussion for a separate video. Otherwise, guys, that's pretty much everything I wanted to go over in this one. Hopefully you did enjoy it, hopefully you found it helpful, and if you do want to check out some more Pokemon Go content, I'm going to recommend these two videos next.